My husband placed his hand on the small of his assistant's back, right in front of the city's elite. He smiled at her like I was a ghost, then delivered the sentence that severed our 6-year marriage. "If you cannot handle it, then leave," he whispered. So I did. As the elevator doors closed, I made a choice he never saw coming. It was not a retreat. It was the beginning of his end. My name is Melody Schmidt, and I was 35 years old when I watched my husband destroy his life in a single, arrogant sentence. The air inside the Ravencrest Hotel ballroom was set to a precise 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the humid Austin night waiting outside the glass doors. It was the kind of charity gala where the ticket price was higher than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and the champagne tasted like liquid gold. I stood near a pillar wrapped in white silk, clutching a crystal flute that was sweating against my palm. My husband, Evan Caldwell, was 10 feet away. He was the director of business development, a man who built his career on charm and handshake deals. Tonight, however, he was selling something else entirely. He was not alone. Standing next to him was Brielle Hart. She was 27, fresh-faced, and currently employed as his direct subordinate. I knew her name because Evan had mentioned it in passing, usually buried in lists of team members working late on the Q3 projections. Seeing her in person, however, painted a picture that no spreadsheet could capture. She wore a slip dress that shimmered like oil on water, a bold choice for a corporate-adjacent event, and she was leaning into Evan's space with a gravitational pull that defied professional boundaries. I watched, paralyzed by a cold clarity. Evan was laughing at something she said. It was a deep, chest-rattling laugh that I had not heard directed at me in over 2 years. Then, I saw it. His hand drifted up and settled on the small of her back. It was not the hover hand of a nervous colleague or the firm pat of a mentor. His palm was flush against the fabric of her dress, his thumb tracing a slow, idle circle against her spine. They were standing in the center of the room, surrounded by his boss, his key clients, and the city's power players. To anyone watching, they looked like the couple of the evening. I was just the woman in the navy gown standing by the pillar, a detail he had forgotten to edit out of the frame. The humiliation hit me not as a wave of heat, but as a sheet of ice. I was an auditor by trade. My entire career was built on finding discrepancies, spotting the rot beneath the surface of clean ledgers. I looked at my husband and saw a massive liability, but I was also his wife of 6 years, and I refused to let him make a fool of me without a fight. I straightened my spine, took a breath that tasted of expensive perfume and ozone, and walked toward them. I inserted myself into their circle with the precision of a scalpel. "Evan," I said, keeping my voice light, smooth, and perfectly modulated for a socialite crowd. "You have been monopolizing Brielle all evening. You should introduce me before people think you are keeping her a secret." It was a lifeline. I was giving him an out. I was offering him a chance to step back, introduce his wife, and reframe the tableau as a mentor introducing a promising employee to his spouse. It would have saved his reputation. It would have saved face for me. Brielle blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered with a glossy, practiced expression. "Oh, Melody, it is so nice to finally put a face to the name. Evan talks about the house renovations all the time. The house renovations. Not me, not his life partner, just the project manager of his domestic comfort." Evan did not step back. He did not remove his hand from her back. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes glazed with the intoxication of adrenaline and ego. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity, as if I were a child interrupting a conversation between adults. "We are talking business." "Melody," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the gentle hum of the string quartet. "You would not understand the context." The insult was sharp, but I held my ground. The eyes of the room were starting to shift. I could feel the weight of gazes, the VP of operations to my left, the wife of the CEO to my right. They were watching the dynamic, sensing the fracture. I smiled. Though my facial muscles felt tight enough to snap, "I think I understand perfectly. Evan, but maybe we should call it a night. It is getting late, and you have an early start tomorrow." I reached out, intending to take his arm, to physically guide him away from the precipice he was dancing on. He recoiled. It was a subtle movement, a jerk of his shoulder, but under the crystal chandeliers, it looked like a slap. He leaned in close, bringing his face down to mine. I smelled the scotch on his breath, mixed with the cloying vanilla of Brielle's perfume. His eyes were cold, stripped of any affection, stripped of the history we had built over 6 years. "Stop nagging me," he hissed. I stared at him. The room seemed to go silent. "Evan," I warned, my voice dropping to a whisper. "People are watching. Let them watch," he said, straightening up and raising his voice again, performing for an audience I did not realize he was courting. "I am having a good time. If you are miserable, that is your problem." I felt the blood drain from my face. Brielle covered a giggle with her hand, pretending to cough. Evan looked down at me, his chin high, his arrogance shielding him from the reality of what he was doing. He felt invincible. He felt chosen, and I was the anchor dragging him down. Then he said it. The sentence that would cost him everything. "If you cannot handle it, then leave." He turned his back on me. He actually turned his back, shifting his stance to box me out, returning his attention and his hands to Brielle. Time seemed to suspend. I looked at the back of his tuxedo jacket. I looked at Brielle's triumphant smirk. I looked at the CEO's wife, who quickly averted her eyes, embarrassed on my behalf. They expected tears. They expected a scene. They expected the shrill voice of a scorned woman begging for attention. I gave them none of that. I gently placed my full glass of champagne on the waiter's passing tray. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. My heartbeat, which had been hammering against my ribs, suddenly slowed to a rhythmic, predatory thud. "Okay," I said. It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was an agreement. I turned around and walked away. I did not run. I did not look back. My heels clicked against the marble floor. A steady, rhythmic countdown. I walked past the open bar, past the silent auction tables, and out through the double doors. The heavy oak slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. As I stood alone in the quiet, carpeted hallway waiting for the elevator, the silence was deafening. Inside that ballroom, Evan was likely laughing, thinking he had won, thinking he had successfully dismissed the nagging wife to enjoy his night of glory with his younger admirer. He thought he had asserted dominance. He thought he was free. He had no idea that by sending me away, he had just removed the only person in that room who was protecting him. He had stripped away his cover. He was now standing there, drunk and groping a subordinate, in full view of the people who controlled his career, without his wife there to normalize the image. He had cracked the foundation of his own life, and he was too busy smiling to hear the stones splintering. The elevator dinged, the doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the metal doors closed, sealing me off from the party, I checked my watch. It was 9:45 in the evening. By the time the sun came up over Austin, the man who told me to leave would wish he had begged me to stay. To understand how I ended up standing alone in that hotel lobby, you have to go back 6 weeks. You have to understand the specific, cruel irony of my life. My title is Senior Investigative Auditor for the Silverline Public Integrity Group. It is a mouthful of a name for a very simple job description. I hunt down lies. I spend 40 to 50 hours a week combing through the financials of nonprofits and charitable organizations, looking for the bleed. I look for the ghost employees on payroll, the vendor invoices that lead to residential addresses, and the miscellaneous expenses that are actually family vacations disguised as site visits. My professional reputation is built on a singular, unyielding trait, which is that I do not miss the details. I can spot a 2% variance in a ledger from across the room. Yet, for the better part of a year, I was the victim of the oldest, clumsiest fraud in the book, perpetrated right inside my own home in Allendale. Evan and I had met 5 years ago at a regional industry mixer. He was charming, ambitious, and wore a suit that fit him perfectly. We married a year later, For the first 3 years, we were the couple our friends envied. We were the dual income, no kids power couple who posted photos of our European vacations and our mid-century modern renovation projects. We had a rhythm. We had a plan. We were partners in the truest sense of the word, building a life that looked as good on paper as it felt in reality. But around the 4th year, the atmosphere in our house shifted. It was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow leak. Evan did not stop coming home, but he stopped arriving. He would walk through the front door, but his mind remained elsewhere. Our conversations, which used to be rich with debates about politics, movies, and our future, dried up into transactional exchanges. We stopped talking like lovers and started talking like roommates managing a chore chart. Did you pay the electric bill? Did you call the landscaper? What do you want for dinner? The emotional currency of our marriage was being devalued day by day. And I, the expert auditor, chalked it up to market fluctuations. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself work was stressful for him. I made excuses for the silence because the alternative was too terrified to contemplate. The first red flag was the phone. For the entirety of our relationship, Evan had been careless with his devices. His phone would be tossed on the coffee table, left on the kitchen counter while he showered, or plugged into the charger on my side of the bed. The passcode had always been my birthday. It was an open book policy that we never even discussed because we had nothing to hide. Then, 6 weeks ago, the pattern broke. We were sitting in the living room on a Tuesday night. I was reading a case file, and he was scrolling through emails. He stood up to get a glass of water, and as he did, he slid his phone into his pocket. It was a small motion, fluid and practiced. When he came back, he sat down and placed the phone on the table, but he placed it face down. I stared at the matte black case. In the past, he would have left the screen up to see notifications. Now, the glass was hidden. Later that night, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Instinctively, I reached over to silence it, not intending to snoop, just to check the time. When I tapped the screen, the 4-digit prompt appeared. I typed in the month and day of my birth. Incorrect passcode. I stared at the shaking text box. My stomach dropped. A sensation similar to when an elevator descends too quickly. I tried again, thinking my finger had slipped. Incorrect passcode. Try again in 1 minute. He had changed the key to his digital life, and he had not mentioned it. When he came out of the bathroom, toweling off his hair, I asked him about it casually. I tried to sound bored. I told him I tried to check the time, but the code did not work. He did not look at me. He walked to the dresser, picked up the phone, and shrugged. Oh, yeah. It made us update our security protocols. Mandatory complexity requirements. I had to change it to something random. Sorry, it was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I knew his company's policy. They required 6-digit codes for work devices, not 4, but I said nothing. I filed it away. A single anomalous data point in the ledger of our marriage. Then came the schedule. Evan had always had client dinners. It was part of business development. But historically, these dinners were sporadic. They happened on Tuesdays or Thursdays, sometimes a lunch on a Friday. Suddenly, the calendar became rigid, every Wednesday and every Friday. Like clockwork, he had a client dinner. I am meeting with the chaotic energy guys, he would say, or I have to smooth things over with the distributors. Consistency is usually a sign of reliability, but in fraud detection, patterns are suspicious. Real life is messy. Real business meetings get rescheduled, canceled, or moved. But these Wednesday and Friday blocks were immutable. He would leave the house smelling of soap and return 4 hours later smelling of mints and exhaustion. Yet he never seemed to have any leftovers, and he never complained about the food. And then there was the name, Brielle. She had joined his team 6 months prior. At first, she was just a new hire he had to train. Then she became the one with the fresh ideas. Then she was the one who really understood the new software. Brielle thinks we should pivot the marketing strategy, he said over breakfast one morning. Brielle found this incredible coffee shop near the office. He mentioned while we were driving. Brielle is having a hard time with her landlord. so I told her she could leave early to handle it. He told me while staring at his laptop. I noticed a change in his voice when he spoke her name. It was subtle, a slight lift in pitch, a brightness that was absent when he spoke to me. It was the sound of dopamine. He spoke about her with a protective fondness, framing her as a brilliant young talent who needed his mentorship. If I ever offered a critique of a story involving her, he would snap. He would become defensive, accusing me of not understanding the office dynamic or being critical of someone I had never met. I sat in our beautiful, quiet kitchen in Allendale, looking at the granite countertops we had picked out together, and I felt the ground shifting. I was a woman who could trace a shell company through 3 different offshore jurisdictions. Yet I was sitting there, listening to my husband talk about another woman, and forcing myself to believe it was innocent. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to be wrong. I wanted the password change to be an IT mandate. I wanted the Wednesday and Friday dinners to be vital for his career. I wanted Brielle to be just a hard-working employee. Because if I was right, if my auditor's intuition was finally waking up to the reality of my own life, then the man I loved was gone, and I was sleeping next to a stranger who was systematically dismantling our vows. But the data was mounting. The variances were becoming too large to ignore. And unlike my work at Silverline, where I could simply issue a subpoena, here I had to wait. I had to watch. I had to let the evidence accumulate until the picture was so clear that even my broken heart could not deny what my brain already knew. The audit had begun. Even if I was not yet ready to admit it to myself, suspicion is a ghost, haunting the corners of your mind with what-ifs and possibilities. Evidence, however, is a solid object. It has weight, it has mass, and it has edges sharp enough to cut. Once I decided to treat my marriage like a forensic audit, the ghosts vanished, replaced by a trail of paper and digital footprints that Evan had been too arrogant to sweep away. The first piece of the puzzle arrived on a Monday morning while I was sorting the laundry. Evan had left his charcoal suit trousers on the bedroom floor, a careless habit he had slipped back into. As I checked the pockets for loose change or tissues, my fingers brushed against a crumpled ball of thermal paper. I smoothed it out on top of the washing machine. It was a receipt from the Gilded Fork, a high-end steakhouse downtown known for its dim lighting and prix-fixe menus. The date stamped on the bottom was the previous Friday. That night, Evan had told me he was grabbing quick beers and burgers with the logistics team to celebrate a contract renewal. I looked at the itemized list. There were no burgers. There was no beer. Instead, there were 2 orders of filet mignon, a bottle of Barolo priced at $120, and, most damning of all, a single order of chocolate soufflé with 2 spoons listed in the special instructions. I stared at that line item, 2 spoons. It was such a specific, intimate detail. You do not share a chocolate soufflé with the head of logistics. You do not order a $100 bottle of wine for a quick team outing. The total bill came to $340.50. My husband had spent more on a single Friday night dinner with someone else than we had spent on our anniversary celebration 2 months prior. I did not scream. I did not march into the home office where he was currently on a conference call and throw the paper in his face. That is what an emotional wife would do. I was not an emotional wife anymore. I was an investigator building a case file. I walked to my study, turned on my scanner, and digitized the receipt. I created a new folder on my encrypted cloud drive. I did not name it Cheating Husband or Evidence. I named it Tax 2025. It was boring, administrative, and invisible, the perfect hiding place. 3 days later, the second breadcrumb appeared. I was taking his navy blazer to the dry cleaners. I always check the interior breast pocket, mostly out of habit. Inside, I found a heavy cardstock folio, the kind used by boutique hotels to hold electronic keycards. It was from the Archer, a trendy hotel near the Tech District. Inside the folio was the final bill. Evan had told me he was at an all-day leadership seminar on Wednesday. The bill showed a check-in time of 10 in the morning and a checkout time of 2 in the afternoon. 4 hours, a day rate. The room service charge listed a bottle of champagne and a fruit platter. My hands shook, but only for a moment. The pain was there, a dull ache in my chest. but it was being rapidly overtaken by a cold, calculating fury. He was not just cheating, he was sloppy. He was bringing the evidence into our home, relying on my blind trust to keep him safe. I scanned the hotel bill and added it to the Tax 2025 folder. I decided it was time to look at the macro level. We shared a primary credit card for household expenses, but we also had individual cards for personal spending. However, because we were applying for a mortgage refinancing earlier in the year, we had consolidated our login information for the bank. He had likely forgotten that I still had access to view the transaction history of his personal Visa. I logged in. The screen populated with rows of data. I downloaded the last 6 months of statements and exported them into a spreadsheet. I began to filter the data, isolating the charges that occurred on Wednesdays and Fridays. The pattern was so obvious it was insulting. Every Wednesday, there was a charge at a coffee shop near the Domain, followed usually by a lunch charge at places that were too nice for a solo meal. Every Friday, the charges escalated: cocktail bars, florists, and rideshare apps. I cross-referenced the rideshare drop-off points. They were not going to his office. They were going to an apartment complex on the north side of town. As I was staring at the glowing rows of numbers, a text message notification lit up the room. Evan's phone was sitting on the kitchen island, charging. He was in the garage, tinkering with his golf clubs. I happened to be walking past with a mug of tea. The screen lit up, and for a brief 3 seconds, the message was visible before the screen went dark again. It was from a number not saved in his contacts, but the preview text was clear. Last night was perfect. Repeat. I did not touch the phone. I did not try to unlock it. I memorized the timestamp and the exact wording. I went back to my laptop and added a new column to my spreadsheet. I began to construct a timeline, a technique I used at Silverline to track embezzlement schemes. I created 4 columns: date, the alibi, the reality, and the cost. Row 1, October 4th, the alibi networking event, the reality dinner at Blue Sushi and rideshare to North Loop. The cost, $200, row 2. October 11th, the alibi. Late night strategy session, the reality hotel room, booking at the Archer. The cost, $350. I filled in row after row. The sheer volume of lies was staggering. He had looked me in the eye dozens of times, kissed me goodbye, and walked out the door to spend thousands of dollars on another life. But as I analyzed the data, I noticed something that made the blood run cold in my veins, something that went beyond marital betrayal. There were gaps in the personal credit card statement. On several of the nights where I knew he was with her, nights where the timeline was solid, there were no charges on his personal Visa. Yet, they had gone to dinner. They had stayed in hotels. I pulled up the bank statements for our joint account. Nothing. Then, I remembered the receipt from the Gilded Fork. I zoomed in on the scanned image on my screen. At the very bottom, next to the payment method, it did not say Visa ending in 4589, which was his personal card. It said Amex corporate ending in 1002. My breath hitched. He had paid for the romantic dinner with Brielle using his company credit card. I went back to the hotel bill from the Archer. I zoomed in. Payment method, Amex corporate. I sat back in my chair. The implications crashing over me. Evan was not just spending our money. He was expensing his affair to his employer. He was likely coding these romantic escapades as client entertainment or business development meetings. This was no longer just a domestic drama. This was fraud. I looked at the spreadsheet again. I added a 5th column and labeled it Funding Source. I started highlighting the entries in red where the personal card was not used. There were at least 12 instances in the last 2 months alone. He was stealing from his company to fund his infidelity. A strange calm settled over me. If he had just cheated, it would have been a matter of heartbreak and divorce court. But by crossing the line into financial malfeasance, he had given me a weapon far more powerful than anger. He had handed me the ability to dismantle his entire professional existence. I saved the spreadsheet. I backed up the folder to an external hard drive and hid it in the bottom of my jewelry box. I closed my laptop just as I heard the garage door open and Evan's footsteps approaching the kitchen. "Hey," he called out, his voice casual. oblivious to the fact that his life had just been itemized and flagged for review. "Have you seen my phone?" "It is on the counter," I replied. My voice was steady. My pulse was slow. I watched him pick up the device, check the screen, and smile slightly, presumably at the text message I had already cataloged. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled back. It was not a smile of affection. It was the smile of an auditor who had just found the variance that would bring the whole house of cards down. Most people assume that revenge is a crime of passion, a chaotic explosion of screaming matches and slashed tires. They are wrong. True revenge, the kind that leaves a crater where a life used to be, is a project management challenge. It requires logistics, financing, and a team of qualified professionals. Once I had my spreadsheet, I knew I could not execute the next phase alone. I needed experts who could take my raw data and forge it into a weapon. I started by hiring Tessa Rowan. I found her through a secure referral network used by high-level corporate auditors. Tessa was not the noir detective in a trench coat. She was a 40-year-old woman who looked like a soccer mom but had a background in forensic accounting and surveillance. We met at a nondescript bakery 10 miles from my office. I slid a flash drive across the table. It contained the Tax 2025 folder. "I do not just need you to prove he is sleeping with her," I told her. Sipping my black coffee, "I need you to prove he is spending marital assets on her. And I need you to verify if he is double-dipping, charging his company for dates that are actually personal." Tessa pocketed the drive. She did not ask for a sob story. She simply nodded and quoted me her retainer. $3,000 to start. I wrote the check without hesitating. Next came the legal counsel. I interviewed 3 divorce attorneys in 2 days, taking long lunches to meet them. The first was too sympathetic. He wanted to talk about my feelings. The second was too passive. He suggested mediation immediately. The third was Kara Whitman. Kara worked out of a glass-walled office downtown that smelled of leather and intimidation. She was known as the Barracuda of Travis County. She listened to my summary for 10 minutes without interrupting, her face a mask of bored intelligence. When I finished explaining the credit card discrepancies and the potential corporate fraud, she finally smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "You have leverage," Kara said, leaning forward. "Most wives come in here with a lipstick stain on a collar. You came in with a forensic audit. We can work with this." I retained her immediately. Her hourly rate was $450, but I considered it an investment in my future freedom. Under Kara's instruction, I began to insulate my finances. I went to a bank where Evan and I had no history and opened a checking account in my name only. I did not drain our joint accounts that would look malicious to a judge, but I began to transfer exactly half of our liquid savings, documenting every cent as a preservation of marital share. I was not hiding money, I was securing it. Then, I went to work on the documentation. I spent my evenings, while Evan was supposedly working late, scanning every piece of paper in our home office. I made digital copies of the mortgage deed, the car titles, his life insurance policies, and our investment portfolio. As I organized the files, I realized something that shocked me. In the hustle of our daily lives, I had assumed our contributions were roughly equal, but looking at the last 2 years of tax returns and bank statements, the reality was different. Since Evan had taken his director role, his base salary had increased, but his spending had skyrocketed. Meanwhile, my bonuses at Silverline had been consistently deposited into our savings or used to pay down the principal on the house. I did the math. For the last 24 months, I had covered 70% of our actual household operating costs. Evan's money was going to lifestyle maintenance, expensive clothes, golf fees, and as I now knew, dinners at the Gilded Fork. I was not just the wife. I was the primary investor in a failing enterprise. A week later, Tessa sent me a secure link to her preliminary report. I opened it on my secure laptop while sitting in my car during my lunch break. The report was clinical and devastating. Tessa had tracked them for 4 days. There were photos of Evan and Brielle entering a boutique hotel near the Domain, a high-end shopping district. They arrived separately, but left together. The photos were high resolution. You could see the way Evan held the door for her, the way she leaned into him. It was not the body language of colleagues, but the real bomb was on page 4 of the report. Tessa had run a background check on Brielle Hart. She confirmed that Brielle was indeed a business development associate at Evans' firm. However, Tessa had gone a step further and pulled the organizational chart from a cached version of the company's internal directory. Subject Evan Caldwell is the direct reporting manager for Subject Brielle Hart, the report read. Furthermore, according to social media posts from the company's official page, Mr. Caldwell signed off on Ms. Hart's Employee of the Month recognition 2 weeks ago, which included a cash bonus. I stared at the screen. This was the smoking gun. If they were just peers, it was an office romance messy, but not necessarily a firing offense, but a manager sleeping with a direct subordinate. That was a violation of every corporate ethics policy in existence. It was a lawsuit waiting to happen, and the fact that he had signed off on a financial bonus for her while they were sleeping together, that was misappropriation of company funds. It was corruption. I called Kara immediately. He is her boss, I said, my voice shaking slightly, not from sadness, but from the adrenaline of the kill. He is signing her performance reviews. Kara let out a low whistle on the other end of the line. That changes the game. Melody, that is not just leverage against him in the divorce, that is nuclear. If his company finds out, he is done. He loses his job, his severance, and his reputation. I know. I said, here is the strategy, Kara said, her voice turning sharp. We do not confront him yet. We do not let him know you know. If you confront him now, he will try to hide assets or spin the story to his bosses before we are ready. We wait for the perfect moment. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy between us. Listen to me closely. Melody, in the eyes of the court, and in the court of public opinion, the narrative is written by the person who acts first. If he files for divorce, he can claim you were distant, or abusive, or that the marriage was dead. He can frame the narrative. But if you file first, on the grounds of adultery and financial misconduct, you set the baseline. So what do? I asked. You act normal, Kara instructed. You go home, you cook dinner, you ask him about his day, you let him think he is safe. And while he is comfortable, we draft the petition. We prepare the evidence, and when we strike, we do not just serve him papers, we drop a mountain on him. I hung up the phone. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a victim. I checked my makeup, fixed my hair, and started the engine. I had to go home and play the role of the oblivious wife for a few more days. It would be the hardest performance of my life, but I knew I could do it. I was not doing it to save my marriage. I was doing it to ensure that when the end came, I would be the one standing on solid ground while the earth swallowed him whole. The invitation came 3 days before the event, dropped into conversation with a casualness that felt calculated. We were standing in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact as usual, when Evan suddenly asked if I had bought a dress for the Ravencrest charity gala. I froze. For the past 2 years, he had insisted these events were for employees only, or that tickets were too limited to bring spouses. Now, out of nowhere, he wanted me there, for a fleeting, foolish second. A crack appeared in my armor. Despite the spreadsheet tucked away in my jewelry box, despite the photos Tessa had sent me, and despite the forensic accounting of his betrayal, a small, desperate part of me wondered if this was an olive branch. Maybe he was trying to fix things. Maybe he wanted me by his side because he realized he was drifting too far. It is embarrassing to admit, but even with the knife in my back, I was still looking for a reason not to pull it out. I went shopping the next day. I did not buy something soft or romantic. I bought a midnight blue gown, structured and sharp, made of heavy silk that felt like armor against my skin. It cost $800, and for the first time in months, I did not care about the price tag. I told myself it was a costume for the role of the dignified wife, but deep down, I think I wanted to look beautiful for him one last time. I wanted to remind him of what he was throwing away on the night of the gala. The manipulation began before we even left the driveway. Evan came downstairs in his tuxedo, checking his watch with theatrical impatience. I have to swing by the office, he said, avoiding my gaze. The slide deck for the donor presentation has a formatting error. I need to fix it on the secure server before I head to the hotel. I looked at him. It was 6:30 in the evening. Who fixes slides 30 minutes before a black tie event I can wait in the car? I offered. No, he said quickly. Too quickly. You take the Uber. I do not want you sitting in the parking garage. Go ahead. Mingle. Get a drink. I will meet you there in 20 minutes. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I knew his presentation had been finalized and locked 2 days ago. I had heard him bragging about it on the phone. But I nodded. I played my part. I got into the car alone, feeling the cold leather of the seat against my back. Realizing that he did not want to arrive with me, he wanted to arrive on his own terms. When I walked into the Ravencrest ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne. The room was a sea of couples. Men in black tie held hands with women in shimmering gowns. They leaned in to whisper to one another. They laughed in unison. They moved as units. I stood at the entrance, clutching my clutch bag, feeling singularly exposed. I was a married woman attending a celebration of partnership, yet I was standing by the coat check alone. I did 2 laps of the room, sipping a sparkling water, dodging questions from acquaintances who asked where Evan was. He is parking the car. I lied. He is just saying hello to the CEO. I deflected, and then I saw them. They were near the center of the room, standing under the main chandelier. Evan had not come from the office. He was already here, and he had clearly been here for some time. He was holding a scotch, his face flushed with laughter. Brielle was next to him. She was not standing at a professional distance. She was standing inside his personal orbit, her shoulder brushing against his arm. She was wearing a silver dress that looked like liquid mercury. It was beautiful. I had to admit that. But it was the way she looked at him that stopped my breath. It was a look of total ownership. And worse, Evan was basking in it. He looked younger, lighter, completely unburdened by the wife he had sent ahead in a separate car. I watched Brielle reach out and touch his sleeve. It was a small gesture, picking a piece of non-existent lint off his jacket, but it was intimate. It was domestic. It screamed to the room. I know this man better than you do. The hope I had nurtured while buying my blue dress died in that instant. This was not an olive branch. This was a display. He had invited me not to reconcile, but to witness. He wanted to show off his conquest. And he was so arrogant he thought I would be too stupid to notice. I signaled a waiter and took 2 flutes of champagne from his tray. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of pleasant neutrality, and walked toward them. As I approached, the circle of people around them shifted. I saw the VP of sales and his wife, and 2 major donors. They looked from Evan to Brielle, and then they saw me. The conversation died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, awkward, and suffocating. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice steady. I handed one of the glasses to Evan. "You look like you needed a refill." Evan looked at the glass, then at me. He did not smile. There was no warmth, no gratitude. There was only irritation, sharp and immediate. He looked like a teenager whose mother had just walked in on a party. "Melody," he said flatly, "you are here." I forced a smile. "You told me to meet you here." Remember, Brielle took a half step back, but she did not leave. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my dress with a mix of assessment and dismissal. "Hi, Melody," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "We were just discussing the quarterly projections. Evan is so passionate about the new strategy." She used his first name, not Mr. Caldwell, not the director, Evan. I turned to the group, trying to salvage the moment, trying to be the gracious wife one last time. "It is wonderful to see you all. It has been such a busy quarter. We have barely had time to breathe." I waited for Evan to complete the introduction. I waited for him to say, "This is my wife, Melody, the woman who supported me while I built this department." I waited for him to wrap an arm around my waist. Instead, he gestured vaguely in my direction with his scotch glass. "This is Melody," he said to the donors. "My wife." The tone was the same one might use to introduce a piece of furniture or a distant cousin one was forced to bring along. It was a label, not an identity. He turned back to Brielle almost immediately. Anyway, as I was saying about the distribution channels, the humiliation burned hot under my skin. I was being erased in real time. I stood there for another minute, holding my untouched champagne, while my husband turned his back to me to laugh at something his mistress said. The donors looked uncomfortable. The VP's wife gave me a pitying glance that hurt more than the rudeness. I touched Evan's arm. He flinched. "Evan," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear. "Can I talk to you for a second?" He sighed. A loud, exaggerated exhale that signaled to everyone around us that I was being a nuisance. He turned to me, his eyes cold. "What is it I think we should go?" I said quietly. "It has been a long week. Let's just go home." I was giving him an out. I was giving him a chance to leave with me, to choose me, to end this charade before it became a tragedy. He laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Go home. We just got here. I am working. Melody, this is work." He gestured to Brielle. "To the drinks. To the party. You are drunk." "Evan," I said, my voice hardening, "and you are making a scene." His face darkened. The charm evaporated, replaced by the nastiness that had been brewing in our house for months. He stepped into my space, using his height to intimidate me. "I am not the one making a scene," he hissed. "You are the one dragging down the mood. You are always dragging it down." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the weakness in his jaw, the sweat on his brow, the desperate need for validation that Brielle was feeding him with a spoon. I realized then that I did not love him anymore. The man I loved was dead. This was just a stranger wearing his clothes. "If you want to stay, stay," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, flat register. "But I am leaving." He sneered at me. It was a look of pure disdain. "If you cannot handle it, then leave," he said, loud enough for the circle to hear. The words hung in the air. The chatter around us stopped. Brielle covered her mouth to hide a smirk. I looked at him one last time. I memorized the cruelty in his eyes. I wanted to remember it forever. "Okay," I said. I placed my champagne glass on a nearby table. I did not throw it. I did not cry. I smoothed the front of my blue silk dress, turned on my heel, and walked away. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt the mixture of shock and judgment from the crowd. But mostly, I felt lighter. He thought he had just won. He thought he had dismissed me. He had no idea that by sending me away, he had just authorized the launch of the war that would destroy him. As I pushed through the heavy doors and out into the cool night air, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It was time to make the call. The Uber ride back to Allendale was a blur of passing streetlights and silent rage. When I unlocked the front door of our empty house, the silence that greeted me was not lonely. It was clarifying. I kicked off my heels in the hallway and walked straight to the kitchen. I did not pour a drink. I did not collapse onto the sofa. I poured a glass of ice water and set my phone on the counter. The screen lit up. It was Evan. "Where the hell did you go?" 2 minutes later, "You are being dramatic. Come back." 5 minutes later, "People are asking. You are embarrassing me." 10 minutes later, "Pick up the phone." Melody. I watched the messages roll in with a detached curiosity. There was no apology. There was no realization that he had just told his wife to leave their marriage. There was only the narcissistic panic of a man whose prop had malfunctioned on stage. He was not worried about losing me. He was worried about losing control of the narrative in that ballroom. I turned the phone over, face down. I was done reacting. It was time to act. I went into the home office and booted up my laptop. The blue light of the screen washed over the room. I opened the Tax 2025 folder. I opened Tessa's report. I opened my spreadsheet. The columns of lies and stolen money stared back at me. I had enough to divorce him. I had enough to win. But after tonight, winning was not enough. I needed to ensure he could never spin this. I needed a witness who wasn't on my payroll. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Noah Reyes. Noah was a senior analyst at Evan's firm. We had met at 3 different holiday parties. He was a quiet man, observant, the kind who stood near the bar and watched the room rather than working it. I had seen him at the gala tonight, standing near the pillar when Evan humiliated me. I had seen the look on his face. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. It was 11:15 at night. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Hello? Melody. His voice was hushed, background noise suggesting he had stepped outside the ballroom or was in a cab. Noah, I said, I apologize for the late hour. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. There was a pause. I assume this is about what happened with Evan and Brielle. He said, Yes, I replied. Melody, look, I am sorry. What he said to you was, I cut him off. I do not need sympathy. Noah, I need verification. How long has the office known? The silence on the other end was heavy. About 4 months, Noah said, his voice dropping lower. It is the worst-kept secret on the floor. They take long lunches. They book conference rooms for private strategy sessions that last 2 hours. Why hasn't anyone reported it? I asked. Noah sighed. Because Evan is the golden boy. The VP loves him, and Brielle is vindictive. 2 months ago, an admin assistant made a joke about them in the break room. The next week, that assistant was transferred to a satellite office in Houston. Everyone is scared. Melody, nobody wants to be the one to pull the trigger. I gripped the phone tighter. So it was a reign of terror. Evan was not just cheating. He was using his power to silence witnesses. I have evidence. Noah, I said, I have financial records. I have photos. I am going to end this. But I need to know if there is anything else, anything specific to the company that I might have missed. I could hear Noah hesitating. He was weighing his loyalty to the firm against his moral compass. I have a photo, he said finally. What I was at the Ravencrest yesterday evening for a vendor setup. Noah explained. I saw them. They were checking in. Not for a meeting. They had luggage. I took a picture. Why, I asked. Insurance, Noah said. In case Evan ever tried to come after my job, I wanted leverage. I have not shown it to anyone. Send it to me, I said. Melody, send it. Noah, if you want to clear the rot out of your department, this is how you do it. You will remain anonymous. I promise. 30 seconds later, my phone pinged. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Evan and Brielle at the reception desk of the Ravencrest, 24 hours before the gala. His hand was on her lower back. She was laughing. I saved the photo. I added it to the master folder. I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Evan would be coming home soon. Likely drunk. Likely ready to gaslight me into believing I was the villain of the evening. He would expect a fight. He would expect tears. I would give him silence. I opened my email client and composed a new message to Kara Whitman, my attorney. I attached the entire folder, the bank statements, Tessa's surveillance photos, the screenshot of the text message, and Noah's photo. The subject line was simple file tomorrow. I typed rapidly. Kara, the event tonight confirmed everything. He is publicly displaying the affair. Proceed with the filing immediately. I want the papers served tomorrow morning. Do not serve him at home. Do not serve him by mail. Check his calendar. He has a departmental strategy meeting at 9 o'clock. His boss will be there. The entire team will be there. Have the process server enter the room and hand him the papers in front of everyone. Melody, I hit send. The decision settled in my chest like a heavy stone, solid and unbreakable. This was the pivot. If I served him at home, it remained a private tragedy. He could spin it. He could tell his colleagues we grew apart. He could tell Brielle he left me, but serving him at work, at a mandatory meeting that stripped him of the ability to lie. It forced the truth into the fluorescent light of his professional sanctuary. It was brutal, it was aggressive, and it was exactly what he deserved. I closed the laptop. I walked upstairs to the guest bedroom and locked the door. I could hear a car pulling into the driveway. The headlights swept across the ceiling. I heard the front door open, slamming hard. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. Pausing outside the master bedroom, then moving down the hall to where I lay in the dark. "Melody," he shouted through the wood. "Open the door. We are not done talking." I lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling. He pounded on the door once, frustrated, then swore and walked away. He thought he had the power. He thought the conversation would happen on his terms. Whenever he decided to wake up, he had no idea that while he slept off the champagne and the arrogance, the machinery of his destruction was already grinding into gear. The choice I made in the elevator was not just to leave the party, it was to burn the house down, and tomorrow morning, he would smell the smoke. The morning sun was streaming through the windows of the coffee shop across the street from Evan's office building, but I felt none of its warmth. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and a singular, bold determination. My laptop was open. A cup of black coffee sat untouched to my right, and my phone was placed precisely in the center of the table. I was not there to work. I was there to monitor the demolition. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, Evan's weekly departmental strategy meeting began. I knew the schedule by heart. It was the meeting where he preened in front of his boss, Dave, and assigned impossible tasks to his team. It was the meeting where Brielle usually sat 2 chairs away from him, taking notes and exchanging secret glances. At 9:12 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text message from the process server. Subject served. Personal delivery confirmed in conference room B. Remarks. Subject appeared agitated. I took a slow sip of coffee. The first domino had fallen. I imagined the scene, the heavy glass doors opening, the stranger in the cheap suit walking past the confused receptionist, the interruption of Evan's monologue, the white envelope sliding across the polished mahogany table, landing between his laptop and his coffee mug, the silence of 20 people watching their director get served divorce papers in the middle of a 4:15 projection. 2 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate. Evan. I watched the screen light up, his name flashing with an urgency that bordered on manic. I did not answer. The call went to voicemail. He called again immediately, then a third time. I let it ring until the battery heated up against the table surface. Finally, the texts started pouring in. "What is this? Are you insane? You sent a server to my meeting. Dave was sitting right there. Pick up the phone. Everyone is staring at me. You have ruined my credibility." I waited until the barrage slowed down. Then I typed my response. I kept it surgical. I did not engage with his anger or his embarrassment. I simply quoted the instruction he had given me less than 12 hours prior. "You told me to leave." I did. I hit send. Then, I blocked his number for the next hour. I needed the line clear for my attorney. Kara Whitman called me at 9:30. "The motion is filed." "Melody," she said, her voice brisk and professional. "We have requested exclusive temporary use of the marital residence. Given the volatility of the situation and the financial dissipation we are alleging, the judge is likely to grant it quickly. We are framing his removal as necessary to prevent him from destroying more evidence or assets." "Good," I said. "When will he know?" "By the time he gets back to his desk," Kara replied, but Evan was not going to make it back to his desk. Not if I executed the next step correctly. I opened my email client. In the drafts folder, I had a message waiting. It was addressed to the Vice President of Human Resources and the Chief Ethics Officer at Evan's firm. The subject line was neutral and bureaucratic. Formal ethics complaint regarding conflict of interest and policy violations. Evan Caldwell. I took a breath. This was the point of no return. Filing for divorce was personal. This was professional execution. I attached the files. First, the organizational chart showing the reporting line. Second, the performance review he signed for Brielle with the bonus authorization. Third, the photos from Noah showing them checking into the Ravencrest Hotel on a Tuesday. And finally, the spreadsheet of the client dinners that coincided with the hotel stays. I did not write a long, emotional letter. I wrote, "Please find attached documentation regarding a violation of the manager-subordinate relationship policy involving Mr. Evan Caldwell and Ms. Brielle Hart. Additionally, please review the attached expense anomalies which suggest company funds were utilized to facilitate this personal relationship." I clicked send. The second bomb had been dropped. I sat back and waited. The reaction time of a corporate HR department when faced with a sexual harassment lawsuit liability is faster than a heartbeat. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was Noah. He was texting me from the bathroom. Holy moly. HR just walked onto the floor. 2 of them. They went straight to Evan's office. He is shouting. They are closing the blinds. 5 minutes later, they just went for Brielle. She looks like she's going to throw up. They are taking them to separate conference rooms. I could picture it. The isolation. The sudden realization that the walls were closing in. Evan would try to bluster his way out of it. He would use his charm. He would claim it was a misunderstanding, or that I was a crazy, jealous wife fabricating evidence. But Brielle was 27. She was ambitious, and most importantly, she was not married to him. When faced with the termination of her own career, self-preservation would kick in. I found out later from Noah what happened in that room. When HR presented Brielle with the photos and the policy violation, she panicked. She did not try to protect Evan. Instead, she pulled out her own phone. She showed them the text messages, hundreds of them. He kept pressuring me. She reportedly sobbed to the HR director. I was afraid if I said no, he would give me a bad review. Look, here is the text where he says he can make sure I get the promotion if I meet him at the hotel. She flipped the narrative. She painted herself as the victim of a predatory boss. Whether it was entirely true or not didn't matter. It was the final nail in Evan's coffin. She had just handed the company the legal justification to fire him for cause, but the twist, the one even I had not fully calculated, came from the finance department. At 11 o'clock, Noah texted again. It is here. They are seizing Evan's laptop. Rumor is legal is involved now. Something about the credit cards. I smiled. The spreadsheet. By sending the list of dates and expenses, I had forced the company to audit his spending. They were looking at the charges for the gilded fork, the hotel rooms, the flowers. They were cross-referencing them with his calendar. They were realizing that there were no clients at those dinners. There were no business meetings at those hotels. Evan had not just cheated on his wife, he had stolen from his employer to do it. He had expensed his affair. In the corporate world, sleeping with an assistant is a scandal, but stealing money is a crime. The company could settle a harassment claim, but fraud was black and white. At 11:30, I closed my laptop. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, exhaustion-fueled calm. I had woken up that morning as a woman who had been humiliated at a party. 3 hours later, I was a woman who had successfully dismantled the life of the man who tried to break me. I paid for my coffee. I checked my phone one last time. There was a voicemail from Evan. Left 10 minutes ago. I played it as I walked to my car. He was not shouting anymore. His voice was shaking, breathless, terrified. Melody, please, you have to stop this. They are talking about a forensic audit. They are talking about police. I could go to jail. Please, call them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them anything. I deleted the message. I did not have to tell them anything. The numbers told the truth. The photos told the truth. He was the one who had been selling lies for years. Today, the market had finally crashed. I got into my car and drove toward the house in Allendale. I had to meet the locksmith. By the time Evan was escorted out of the building by security without his phone, without his laptop, and without his dignity, his key would no longer fit the lock of the home he had told me to leave. The locksmith had left at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was a man of few words, which I appreciated. He simply replaced the tumblers on the front and back doors, handed me a set of 3 shiny brass keys, and accepted his payment of $250 without asking why a woman was changing the locks on a house that clearly contained men's boots in the hallway. I spent the next 3 hours preparing for the siege. I did not pace. I did not cry. I sat in the living room wingback chair, the one facing the foyer, with a book I was not reading resting on my lap. The house was quiet. For years, I had filled this silence with music, with cooking smells, with the chatter of a wife trying to entertain a bored husband. Now, the silence was a shield. It was the sound of a perimeter being secured. Evan arrived at 7:45. I heard the engine of his Audi first. aggressive and loud as he turned into the driveway. Then came the heavy slam of the car door. He was stomping up the walkway. I could visualize his face red, sweating, a mixture of exhaustion and fury. He had spent the last 8 hours being interrogated by human resources, having his laptop seized by IT, and watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. He was coming home to vent. He was coming home to scream at me until he felt powerful again. I heard the metal slide of his key entering the lock. He turned it. It stuck. He jiggled it, impatient. He turned it the other way. Nothing. I sat perfectly still, listening to the confusion turn into realization, and then into rage. He rang the doorbell, once, twice, then he started pounding. Melody. Open the damn door, the lock is jammed. I stood up, smoothed the fabric of my trousers, and walked to the door. I did not unlock it fully. I slid the heavy brass chain into its track, a security measure we had installed years ago but never used. I turned the deadbolt and cracked the door open 3 inches. Evan's face appeared in the gap. He looked wrecked. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wild. When he saw the chain, he actually recoiled, as if I had pointed a gun at him. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to push the door open. The chain pulled taut, holding firm. "Let me in. You cannot come in." "Evan," I said. My voice was low, modulated, the same tone I used when presenting a difficult audit finding to a board of directors. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. "Is this a joke? I have had the worst day of my life. HR is all over me. Brielle is hysterical. I need to come inside, get a drink, and figure out how to fix the mess you made. Open the door." I shook my head slowly. I spoke with my attorney. "Kara, this afternoon," I said, "we have filed a motion for exclusive temporary use of the marital residence. Given the financial irregularities and the hostile environment, I have asked the court to bar you from the property until the divorce is finalized. Financial irregularities." He spat the words out. "You mean the expenses?" "That is just accounting errors." "Melody, I can explain all of that. You are blowing this out of proportion. The numbers do not lie." "Evan," I replied, "and neither do the hotel receipts." He stopped pushing against the door. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair. His demeanor shifted instantly. The aggression melted away, replaced by the wheedling, manipulative charm that had worked on me for 6 years. He put his hand on the door frame, leaning in, trying to make eye contact through the narrow gap. "Melody, baby, look, I know you are hurt. I know last night was bad. I had too much to drink. I was stressed. But you cannot lock me out of my own house. This is our home. We built this. Just let me in. We will order some food, and we can talk this through like adults." I watched him perform. It was a fascinating display. He truly believed that if he just said the right words, if he just lowered his voice to that intimate register, I would forget the humiliation, the infidelity, and the fraud. He thought he was still the protagonist of this story. "I am not hurt. Evan," I said, "I am protecting my assets." His face hardened again. The charm vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You are doing all of this because you are jealous. You saw a pretty girl next to me and you lost your mind. You are acting like a crazy, vindictive woman just because I have a work friend." "A work friend?" I repeated. "Yes, a work friend," he yelled, his voice echoing off the porch ceiling. "You are destroying my career because of your own insecurities." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stood in a ballroom 24 hours ago and treated me like a piece of refuse. I remembered the exact cadence of his voice when he dismissed me. I took a breath. "I am not acting out of jealousy." I said, "I am acting out of compliance." "Compliance? What are you talking about?" I looked him dead in the eye through the crack in the door. "Last night, you gave me a very clear instruction." I said, "Do you remember what you said to me when I told you I wanted to leave the party?" He blinked, confused by the shift in topic. "I do not know. I was drunk. I remember." I said, "You said, If you cannot handle it, then leave. I paused, letting the words hang in the humid night air between us. I decided I could not handle it. Evan. So I left. I left the party. I left the marriage. And now, I am leaving you outside. He stared at me, stunned. The echo of his own arrogance had just come back to slam the door in his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but he had nothing left to say. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. I reached down to the floor behind the door. I picked up a large, black duffel bag I had packed earlier. It contained 3 suits, a week's worth of casual clothes, his toiletries, and his golf shoes. I unhooked the chain for a split second, shoved the bag through the opening, and slammed the door shut before he could react. I threw the deadbolt. I slid the chain back into place. Your essentials are in the bag. I called out through the wood. You can contact Kara's office to arrange a time to pick up the rest of your things this weekend. Do not come back without a police escort or my lawyer present. If you do, I will call the authorities and have you arrested for trespassing. I heard him kick the door. A dull, hollow thud. Melody, he screamed. You cannot do this. I did not answer. I walked away from the door. I walked down the hallway, past the photos of our wedding that I still needed to take down, and into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of wine. My hands were perfectly steady. Outside, I heard a string of profanities, followed by the sound of a heavy bag being dragged across the concrete. Then, the car door slammed again. The engine roared to life, and the tires screeched as he backed out of the driveway. He was gone. He thought he had hit rock bottom. He thought being locked out of his house and investigated by HR was the worst of it. But as I took a sip of the wine, I thought about the 3rd folder on my laptop, the one containing the evidence that Kara and I were preparing for the forensic accountant. Evan was worried about where he was going to sleep tonight. He should have been worried about whether he was going to prison. The house was mine. The silence was mine. And for the first time in 6 years, the future was mine, too. The week following the lockout was not spent in mourning. It was spent in discovery. While Evan was presumably sleeping on a friend's couch and dodging calls from his company's legal department, I was sitting in the conference room of Kara Whitman's law firm, surrounded by boxes of financial records. We had moved past the phase of proving infidelity. That was easy. The hotel receipts and the text messages had done that work for us. Now, we were entering the phase that I called the autopsy of the future. We were looking to see exactly how much of our shared life Evan had carved out to build his escape raft. The first incision revealed a withdrawal that made my stomach turn. I was reviewing the transaction history of a secondary savings account, one we rarely touched, reserved for emergency home repairs or medical deductibles. On the screen, a line item glared at me. October 12th, withdrawal, $12,500. The notation was vague, miscellaneous investment. I looked at Kara. Evan does not make miscellaneous investments. I said, he researches everything for weeks. He reads prospectuses. He does not just drop $12,000 on a whim. Kara nodded and typed something into her laptop. She had subpoena power now, and she had been busy. We traced that transfer, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It did not go into a mutual fund. Melody, it went to Harrison & Coney Jewelers. I stared at the paper. Harrison & Coney was where we had bought my wedding band 6 years ago. He bought a ring, I said, the realization settling over me like a cold fog. He did. Kara confirmed. A platinum band with a princess-cut diamond. We have the receipt. It was picked up 2 days before the gala. I closed my eyes. He had used our emergency fund money we had saved for a burst pipe or a broken roof to buy an engagement ring for his mistress. He was not just having an affair. He was planning a succession. He intended to propose to Brielle, likely using the momentum of his victory at the gala, funded by the wife he was planning to discard. But that was just the insult. The injury was buried deeper in the paperwork. As we dug further, we found the asset shuffling. 2 months ago, Evan had received a performance bonus in the form of company stock options. According to our marital agreement and state law, that bonus was community property but the records showed he had immediately liquidated the stock and transferred the cash $28,000 into a private brokerage account under his brother's address. He was hiding assets. He was stockpiling cash to ensure that when the divorce hit, he would appear to have less, lowering his potential alimony or settlement payout. Then came the document that changed everything. Kara handed me a credit report she had pulled that morning. "Melody, did you authorize a personal loan last month?" she asked, her voice careful. I frowned. "No. We have excellent credit. We pay our balances in full. I have not applied for a loan in 5 years. Kara pointed to a line near the bottom of the report. "There is a generic unsecured personal loan for $50,000 opened in your name on September 15th, she said. "The funds were dispersed to a joint checking account, then immediately wired to an offshore entity." My blood went cold. $50,000. "Get me the promissory note," I said, my auditor's instinct taking over completely. Kara pulled the digital copy from the lender's file. I put on my reading glasses and leaned in. There, at the bottom of the page, was my name, and next to it was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. To the untrained eye, it was perfect. The loop of the M was wide. The Y tailed off at the correct angle, but I had spent 15 years analyzing signatures on checks and contracts for fraud investigations. I knew the biomechanics of handwriting better than I knew my own husband. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice flat. "Are you sure?" Kara asked. "It is very close. Look at the pressure points," I said, pointing with a pen. When I sign my name, I lift the pen slightly between the L and the O. It creates a microscopic gap in the ink flow. This signature connects them with a heavy, continuous drag. And look at the date. The slant is backward. I write with a forward slant. I looked up at Kara. "He forged my signature to take out a $50,000 loan in my name," I said. "He took the cash, hid it offshore, and left the debt on my credit report. He was going to divorce me, run off with Brielle, and leave me paying off the cost of his new life." Kara sat back in her chair, a look of pure predatory focus crossing her face. "This is not civil anymore. Melody," she said softly, "this is criminal fraud, bank fraud, identity theft. If we present this to the judge, he is not just losing the house, he is looking at prison time." As if the universe wanted to confirm that the tide had turned completely. Kara's email chimed. She clicked open the message, read it, and then turned the screen toward me. It was from Brielle Hart. Brielle had clearly realized that her ship was sinking, the HR investigation was decimating her career, and she had decided that her only way out was to prove she was a victim of manipulation, not a co-conspirator. The email was addressed to the HR director, but Brielle had blind copied her own personal attorney, who had forwarded it to Kara as part of a discovery exchange. Attached was a PDF of email correspondence between Evan and Brielle from 3 months ago. I read the highlighted text. Evan wrote, "Do not worry about her. It is over. I told her last night that I want a divorce. She agreed. We are just living together until the house sells. You are the only one I want." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He told her we were already separating. I said, "He told her I had agreed to it. That was the linchpin." Evan's entire defense, the story he was currently trying to sell to his friends and family, was that I was a jealous, hysterical wife who was overreacting to a platonic friendship. He was painting himself as the besieged husband, but this email, sent from his own account, proved that he had been planning the exit for months. It proved the premeditation. It proved that he lied to his mistress just as much as he lied to me. Kara printed the email and added it to the stack, right next to the forged loan document and the receipt for the engagement ring. "He has no moves left," Kara said. "We have him on adultery. We have him on dissipation of marital assets. We have him on fraud. And now, thanks to his girlfriend, we have him on perjury if he tries to lie about the timeline in court." I looked at the pile of paper. It represented the complete and total moral bankruptcy of the man I had married. He had tried to steal my money. He had tried to steal my credit. He had tried to steal my reputation. He thought he was a chess master, moving pieces around the board while I was busy looking at the scenery. He did not realize that I was the one who designed the board, Draft the emergency motion. I told Kara, include the forgery, include the ring, and send a copy to his criminal defense attorney, because he is going to need one. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline. Somewhere out there, Evan was likely trying to figure out his next lie. He did not know that the truth was coming for him like a freight train, and I was the one driving the engine. The final negotiation did not take days. It took 45 minutes. In the world of high-stakes divorce litigation, that is not a settlement conference. It is a capitulation. We sat in the largest conference room at Kara Whitman's firm, a space dominated by a long glass table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. On one side sat Evan and a criminal defense attorney he had hastily retained once the forgery allegations surfaced. On the other side sat Kara and me. There was no shouting. There was no dramatic throwing of water glasses. The weight of the evidence I had compiled, the forensic spreadsheet, the forged loan documents, the expense fraud, and the HR policy violations was so heavy that it crushed any fight Evan might have had left. His lawyer looked at the stack of documents, looked at the timeline I had constructed, and simply closed his folder. He whispered something to Evan, who looked pale, unshaven, and smaller than I had ever seen him. The arrogance that had fueled him at the Ravencrest Gala was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that he was not the hero of this story. He was the defendant. The terms were dictated, not debated. The court order was swift and brutal. Evan was required to reimburse the marital estate for every cent he had spent on Brielle Hart. The $12,500 for the engagement ring, the $3,000 in hotel stays, and the thousands spent on dinners, it was all calculated and deducted from his share of the remaining assets. Because of the proven financial fraud regarding the forged loan, the judge awarded me a disproportionate share of the community property. I kept the house in Allendale. I kept the retirement accounts that I had funded. The $50,000 loan that he had taken out in my name was legally assigned to him as his sole debt. A financial albatross, he would have to carry alone. But the financial ruin was only half of his sentence. The professional consequences arrived via a letter from his company's legal department, which Kara slid across the table during the meeting. Evan had been terminated for cause. The investigation triggered by my ethics complaint had confirmed gross misconduct, misappropriation of company funds, and violation of the manager-subordinate relationship policy. There would be no severance package. There would be no glowing recommendation. In an industry as tight-knit as his, he was effectively radioactive. He had traded a six-figure career for an ego boost, and now he had neither. When the meeting adjourned, Evan tried to approach me. We were standing by the elevators, the silence thick and uncomfortable. He looked at me, his eyes searching for some remnant of the woman who used to pack his lunch and listen to his problems. "Melody," he said, his voice cracking. "Can we just go downstairs and get a coffee? Just 5 minutes. I think we owe it to each other to talk like adults. I want to explain." I looked at him. I looked at the suit that was slightly wrinkled, the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation in his posture. He still did not get it. He thought this was a misunderstanding that could be charmed away. He thought he still had access to my energy, my time, and my empathy. I pressed the down button for the elevator. "I have nothing to say to you." "Evan," I replied, "my lawyer has your address for the final paperwork. Do not contact me again." But he started. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. He made a move to follow, but Kara stepped in front of him, blocking his path with a look that could have frozen water. The door slid shut, cutting off his face, ending 6 years of history with a mechanical finality. When we walked out of the building into the bright Austin afternoon, the air felt different. It was cleaner. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that did not feel heavy with lies. But the final scene of the drama was waiting for me on the sidewalk. Brielle Hart was standing near the valet stand. She was wearing sunglasses and a trench coat, looking nothing like the glittering, confident woman who had touched my husband's arm at the gala. She looked tired. When she saw me, she took a step forward, removing her glasses. Her eyes were red. "Melody," she said. I stopped. Kara moved to intervene. But I held up a hand. I wanted to hear this. I just wanted to tell you, Brielle said, her voice trembling. I did not know about the money. I did not know he was stealing from you. He told me you were roommates. He told me the marriage was over years ago. She paused, waiting for me to absolve her, waiting for me to tell her that it was okay, that we were both victims of the same bad man. I lost my job too, she added, a note of bitterness creeping in. I was just deceived. I was a victim here too. I looked at her. I thought about the text messages where she asked him to repeat the night at the hotel. I thought about the way she smirked when Evan told me to leave the party. She was not a victim. She was a willing participant who was only sorry because the bill had finally come due. I stepped closer to her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. He sells lies as a profession, I said, my voice cold and hard as a diamond. And you bought them with your integrity. I did not wait for her response. I turned and walked toward my car. I did not look back at Brielle standing on the curb. I did not look back at the office building where Evan was signing away his future. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and placed the signed divorce decree on the passenger seat. It was done. The audit was complete. The discrepancies had been resolved. I put the car in gear and drove away, not as a scorned wife, but as a woman who had reclaimed her life. One calculated move at a time. The rearview mirror showed nothing but the road behind me, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. I was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment below telling me which country or city you are listening in to connect with our community. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.